Welcome to today's History of the Upper Ohio Valley, brought to you as a public service by ESV Teleproductions. We will address issues and concerns of residents in this area. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest. I'm your host, Bob Connors. Hello again, and welcome to today's History of the Upper Ohio Valley. I'm Bob Connors, your host, and I have a little commentary for you this evening of some things that have been in the news, and we've all been watching Florida. About a month ago, there was a horrible shooting there, and I did some research that I'd like to share with you, some information on the background down there. It was a horrible thing to see 17 lives lost in a school. We don't expect to send our family to schools and have them get injured or killed, and it's just tragedy beyond belief. And after the grief, it led me to start looking into what might have happened down there. And these are some things that I found out that I thought you might be interested in. This story is a lot more involved than it appears to be. So let me start with this. The Florida school shooter, Nicholas Cruz, had over 30 run-ins with the police at his home and other places, and no charges were ever filed. Well, when I heard that, I asked, why were there no charges? That really bothered me, so I looked into what's going on. The police record would have kept him from buying a gun, but he had no record. So why was there no records? We have a little video that might answer that question. If we can roll the video, let's take a look. No video.
PROMISE stands for Preventing Recidivism Through Opportunities, Mentoring, Interventions, Support, and Education. You might not have heard the word recidivism before. It's when someone keeps repeating a behavior. That's where the PROMISE program that you are a part of comes in.
This is an opportunity to not have a criminal background, and that's what we want to keep you from. Your future is so important.
You're not going to have to explain to maybe your future employer that, yeah, I was arrested as a kid and I have to tell this story over and over and over again, how I have learned from my mistakes.
Believe it or not, tens of thousands of kids before you have never been given this opportunity, and they can't find jobs. They're living in ghettos, living in hoods, unemployable.
Not everybody gets a second chance and avoids jail time, but be grateful you did.
A lot of kids think that by being arrested, oh, I'm a big shot, I'm cool. It's not being cool.
You know, this is the land of the free, home of the brave, and people aren't free when they're connected and constrained by the juvenile justice system.
It used to be true that juvenile records were sealed once you became an adult, but that's not true anymore.
We're now finding out with technology and so forth, they don't ever disappear.
Mostly all government agencies, and there's a lot of private businesses now that they check your criminal history before they hire you, and something you do as a student, as a young person, can affect you for the rest of your life.
Recidivism or repeat offending can make matters worse for you.
As you get older, what happens is it just keeps on building on top of each other. So when you think that, oh, I can handle that, and, you know, oh, my buddy went to court or whatever, what you really need to do is you need to come down to the courthouse and see that young man who just got sentenced to 30 years.
What you want to be is continuing your education so that you can go on to live a successful life as an adult. And entering the juvenile justice system interrupts that in a way that you can never get back.
But PROMISE, the program you're a part of for the next few days, is here to make sure that never happens to you.
PROMISE is a second chance. PROMISE is a way for students to have the opportunity when they've made a mistake for whatever reason to make that mistake up, to do better than they did before. It's a way to come where no one's going to blame you, no one's going to point the finger at you. We just want to show you some other ways to make better decisions.
Instead of going to jail, you'd be going to a PROMISE program to look at your behaviors so we can remediate.
So preventing having a criminal record, I think PROMISE is the best place for you to take that opportunity and make the best of it.
We all make mistakes. That's part of life, it's part of the journey. But when you fall down, it's important that you pick yourself up you brush yourself off, and you continue to move forward.
I would like to see the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline in Broward County put out of business.
Public education is about helping our students to have a future and helping them create a path towards the American dream.
The Promise, that was the program, and there are a lot of goals there to try to keep these kids on a straight line, but the methodology becomes a question. The Obama-era Department of Education and Justice, under the Education Secretary Arne Duncan and Attorney General Eric Holder, issued school guidelines in 2014 that claimed students of color are disproportionately impacted by suspensions and expulsions, a situation they say leads to the school to prison pipeline. That discriminates against minority and low-income people. So they're basically talking about a record being established from criminal behavior and bad behavior. Obviously, if somebody just throws a pencil at a teacher, that's not criminal. That's the record that's kept in the school, but the criminal activity that goes on in the school is not recorded, so therefore there's no record of what may have happened. So what is the promise? As you saw in the video, preventing recidivism through opportunities, mentoring, interventions, support, and education. Those are all laudable goals and something that every school should strive to do. But the intent of Promise is not education, is to safeguard the students from entering the judicial system. In other words, no record. According to the Obama administration's 2014 rule, any school district whose disciplinary measures showed a disproportionately greater number of minority students are affected, now this is really key, is open to investigation by the Department of Justice and the Department of Education, regardless of whether the behavior leading to the discipline is unacceptable. That one is a little hard to take. So these schools are going to be investigated if it's determined that they gave a record or discipline to students who deserved it, based on their background, whether or not they're a minority. After the 2016 renewed Promise, it was announced a couple of weeks later, it's 2 weeks after that, October 18th, Broward County's public schools was the only large urban school district in the country to receive a teacher incentive fund grant from the U.S. Department of Education totaling $53,808,909. Now, they got that $53 million by not writing down the criminal behavior of students in that school, in their school districts. They brought down the numbers. Now, social justice activists are behind this, and they assume that just as social disparities in the criminal justice system must be evident that cops are racist, it must also be true that racial disparities in school suspensions must be evidence of teachers being racist. Therefore, teachers, like cops, have to be restrained. They have to restrain the teachers in the classroom. Can you imagine this classroom with teachers with their hands tied behind them, and they cannot discipline or punish the children who are out of hand and young adults? One of the premises of Promise programs cited by the Obama Department of Education of Office and Civil Rights reads as follows: whereas across the country, students of color, students with disabilities, LGBTQ students are disproportionately impacted by school-based arrest for the same behavior as their peers. In other words, they're saying that these minority and protected groups are being disproportionately punished, whereas their peers are not being punished. That's the premise. The Florida Department of Children and Families report regarding an investigation into Cruz, the same guy who did the shooting. In 2016, the school resource officer, Scott Peterson, he is the officer who stayed outside during the shooting and wouldn't go in. He was approached by investigators, and he refused to share any information whatsoever regarding an incident that happened at that school that involved Cruz. So nobody knows what that was. There's no record. If a policy to create criminal behavior is desired, the Obama administration promise policy has to be it. Now, what about other schools? As we looked into this, we found that this threat went out to more than just that particular school. Obama's threat was, even if your school rules are totally fair and administered totally fairly, we may come after you if your discipline numbers aren't racially balanced. So what they're saying here is that whenever they have to report to the government how many discipline actions took place, and if they see that there are more minorities than white people, then the school's going to get an investigation to find out what happened because they're assumed to be a bunch of racists. The Department of Education opened investigations into hundreds of school districts serving millions of students, leaving these schoolhouses in chaos. So hundreds of schools were actually investigated under this program. Philadelphia, another school, bans suspensions for nonviolent misbehavior without coercion. A recent study from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute showed that achievement plummeted and truancy skyrocketed under this program. Another study found that despite years of being told suspensions don't work, more than 80% of Philadelphia teachers believe that they do work. It gets worse as we go along. In one of those schools where the share of teachers who said discipline was maintained from 86% to 19%. So previously 86% said they were maintaining discipline, but under this new program only 19%. That's a massive drop. Well, in that school, a student stabbed and killed another student in a history class. Notably, the latest data states that that school only had 10 suspensions, which is next to nothing. Assaults on teachers are on the rise also. In Syracuse, the district attorney forced the schools to reverse course after a teacher was stabbed. The district attorney in St. Paul called the rise in teacher attacks a public health crisis. So it's really getting out of hand when the district attorney has to step in. Guns, drugs, assaults on teachers are up substantially in Charlotte. In Durham, assaults increased by more than 50% just last year. So this is what is the result of the Promise program. And the fact that this Mr. Cruz had all of these run-ins with the police and no record was kept. He had no record, so there was virtually no reason for not selling him a gun. Had they given him a record that he deserved, with all of these violent activities going on at his house and in the school, he would not have been able to buy the guns he used to shoot people. But I continued to do my research on what's going on with this, and I found that things haven't become any better. It's been over a month since that shooting, and I found an article in the Sun-Sentinel. This is a newspaper in Florida, in that area where the school happened. And the headline is, 2 students arrested in Stoneman Douglas on weapons charges. Deputy suspended for sleeping. Now, mind you, this is a month after that horrible shooting that killed 17 people. I'm going to just read a few snippets from this story to give you an idea of what's going on. 2 students were arrested Tuesday for bringing knives to the Parkland school where 17 were killed by a gunman on February 14th. A third is being mentally evaluated for making online threats. Compounding the anxiety and tension emanating from the campus, a Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School deputy was suspended for sleeping on the job after being caught by a student on Monday evening, and that's according to the Broward Sheriff's Department. The student went out, saw the officer sleeping in his car on campus instead of guarding them, reported it to the police department. The sheriff's office sent an officer over there. The guy's still asleep. The officer knocks on the window and he wakes him up. So he was pretty much out, and that was the security at that school. And just remember what I just said earlier in the story, that they found 2 students who pulled knives on other students, and one is being evaluated for mental illness. Now, the troubling thing that developed here is there was a student who was found to have screenshots of a sophomore snapshot social media account circulated around campus. Now, this is going around the school. Try to get that picture. The picture of this kid is floating around the school. It showed a boy posing with a gun in his waistband, along with images of bullets and some pretty nasty language along with it. Unsettling incidents come a day after Zachary Cruz, now that's the guy who is the brother of the shooter earlier that killed 17 people. Zachary Cruz is 18-year-old, and he was arrested for trespassing on the school grounds where his brother killed all those people. Like his brother, he'd left the school. That there he was back. He was found and arrested. He's undergoing required mental health test right now. In other words, they locked him up and took him to the psychiatrist because he also has problems. Zachary Cruz, he was branded as a threat by prosecutors, is jailed on a $500,000 bond. Since his arrest Monday, he has been taken to the hospital for involuntary psychiatric treatment. So I wanted to bring that in just to help you understand that nothing has been improved since that shooting. That's the exact school where this happened. I can't believe that we're living in a society where that could be happening. The brother of the shooter is back on the school grounds and he has mental illness. 2 students carrying knives and pulled them on students. How did they get the knives into the school? These questions have to be answered. And a third who's walking around the school with pictures of himself with a gun and bullets, making statements about what he was going to do in the school. This is a month after the shooting. I think maybe we all have to take a deep breath and begin to take school security a lot more seriously than we are right now. Obviously, when the government says, I will come and charge you with crimes if you write down that these students are committing criminal activity, you're not going to write it down. There's going to be no record, and so there's nothing to charge them with, and they'll be able to go out and buy guns or anything else they want. Now that sounds like a pretty insane policy. The bad news is that policy is still in effect. Ms. DeVos might take a hint from this and stop doing that. A record is what you keep to help teach people new behavior, to teach them they don't want a record. But if they have nothing to fear because they're not going to write it down, it's not going to be a record, why not just do the behavior? Why not do it? Why not make mistakes? Why not go out and stab somebody? Then nobody's going to write it down. There's going to be no record of it. It seems to me that's pretty crazy. Next time you see us, we'll be back with more. And I have lined up right now an interview with someone who is an expert on school security. And we'll talk about that later. But for now, I'm Bob Connors for today's history of the Upper Ohio Valley. Thank you very much for joining us.